Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Shadow at Night. This is Monday, May the 5th, 2025. On the show tonight, attorney Keith Wilson, KC. That is, King's Counsel. He is an esteemed attorney within Alberta and across Canada, for that matter. He's going to join us tonight to talk about Alberta Independence. A lot of very eventful things have happened in the last couple of days, including a massive rally at the Alberta legislature in Edmonton over the weekend. From the video and from the photos, it looked like thousands of people turned up. But again, I can't tell because of the angles of the photographs and the video, but it looked like so many people. Of course, there was resistance as well. There was an anti-protest put on by First Nations from across the province, who were not all against the idea of Alberta independence, but we don't know exactly what happens to the treaties if and when Alberta separates, although Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, addressed that in an address to Albertans earlier this afternoon, which we'll play part of in just a second. Again, our guest tonight is Keith Wilson. Attorney Keith Wilson. You probably recognize him from Freedom Convoy 2022. Maybe know that name. Keith Wilson. I know that name from somewhere. Yeah, he's going to be on the show tonight. I'm looking forward. It's been a while since we've had a chance to speak to him. We're going to talk about all the ins and outs and how this could actually go down. If, in fact, a majority vote in a referendum next year, let's say, says, yes, we want to leave, then what's next? What's after that? Do you go and have negotiations with the government of Canada? We'll take this, you take that. Keith is up to speed on all of that stuff, and he will be telling us everything we need to know. And it could be an extended show tonight, so we're happy to have him. Keith Wilson on the show in just a few minutes. Hello, who is here watching tonight? It's Sharon in Winnipeg. Sophie is watching. Bob is watching in Sudbury. Hello, Bob. Moonglow is watching on YouTube. Hello, Calvin and Colleen. 80 Marie Gloria is watching in Winnipeg. Hello, David, watching tonight. Val is watching in Sherwood Park, Edmonton. Val, were you at the Independence rally in Edmonton over the weekend? Don't forget to like and share. Get this out, guys, to as many people as you possibly can on Rumble. Bailey 242424, Jimmy Balls 23, notable Lone Arnie is watching tonight. Hello, Jama Grama, LC2, Rowene 30, Susie Q57, Cosford, Esky Dogs, Patricia 0711, Rashton 1, Starliner 1961. Again, like and share, guys. Get this out to as many people as you possibly can. The Shadow at Night live stream, as always, is brought to you by CanadaNanoSilver.com.
Silver is amazing. It has several natural health benefits, and it's been used for hundreds of years for health and healing. That's the main reason they made silverware from silver. But seriously, this nano silver from Silverceuticals is the best and safest silver you can find. There are hundreds of studies and reports on it. I've read some of the studies myself, and it's mind-blowing. One of the things that sets Silverceuticals apart is that it washes out of your body in 24 hours. No silver buildup and no turning blue. And it won't even harm the good bacteria your body needs. It's so effective, they can use very small concentrations of silver, like 10 and 32 parts per million, and still outperform other silvers that have up to 3,000 parts per million. It's safer and more effective at the same time. It is an incredibly small particle that is small enough to work through your body, but big enough not to fall out of suspension. They infuse it into almost all of their products. It works in facial serums, toothpaste, gels, and even gummies that work to help your immune system.
It's in everything, man. And with the toothpaste, no fluoride either. CanadaNanoSilver.com. Call 204-808-9292. You talk to Kevin Arana. And if you have any questions, they will answer them for you. Then go shop it. Check it out. CanadaNanoSilver.com. A healthier brand of products from the freedom community itself. You don't have to go buy it at Shoppers Drug Mart or London Drugs or any of the big companies that are attached to the World Economic Forum and the Bilderbergs and GFunds. Let's be honest, GFunds, that's the Global Net Zero Alliance Mark Carney put together in Glasgow. That's why the Glasgow, Scotland, just a few years ago, even though it seems to be crumbling apart now. We don't know what's going to happen to it, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other show. Keith Wilson joins us in just a second. We will be right back.
If there is a successful citizen-led referendum petition that is able to gather the requisite number of signatures requesting such a question to be put on a referendum, our government will respect the democratic process and include that question on the 2026 provincial referendum ballot as well.
See the little captions underneath the screen there? I'm surprised there was no glug,
Now
glug,
let's talk about
glug.
the elephant in the room, that being separation. We are well aware that there is a large and growing number of Albertans that have lost hope in Alberta having a free and prosperous future as a part of Canada. Many of these Albertans are organizing petitions to trigger a citizen-initiated referendum, as I mentioned earlier. The vast majority of these individuals are not fringe voices to be marginalized or vilified. They are loyal Albertans. They are quite literally our friends and neighbors who've just had enough of having their livelihoods and prosperity attacked by a hostile federal government. They're frustrated, and they have every reason to be. I want to talk directly to those Albertans. I know how frustrated so many of you have become with our country and the feeling of having politicians living thousands of miles away, passing laws and rules that have cost you your loved ones, jobs, careers, dreams, and opportunities for a brighter future. Now, none of us knows what the future holds should Ottawa, for whatever reason, continue to attack our province, as they have done over the last decade. Ultimately, that will be for Albertans to decide, and I will accept their judgment.
Hey, Keith.
Hi, Shadow.
How you doing? Welcome to the show. Good to have you back on.
Great to be back. How's my audio?
Your audio is fine. Everything looks and sounds great. So let me ask you, that was the clip that you sent me from Danielle Smith's address to Albertans this afternoon. It was much longer. I think it was about 12 or 13 minutes in total, but that 2 minutes was definitely a very large part of it. She brought up the elephant in the room. She brought up Alberta independence. Do you think that she is posturing here? Is she playing politics? What is she doing with this?
Well, I think she's accurately reading the pulse of Alberta, and perhaps appropriately contingency planning for once we discover who we elected. You know, we don't know whether we elected the Mark Carney, plagiarizing the Conservatives' platform, or whether we have elected the Mark Carney from his book Values and all of the many speeches he's given around the world, and his obsession with net zero.
The Conservatives today, through Andrew Scheer, because Pierre Poilievre is not an MP, even though he probably will be soon. He's running in the Battle Creek riding. I think I've got that right. in Alberta, even though we hear that that multi-candidate organization is trying to get their hands on that riding in the next couple of months. But we haven't even got a by-election called at this stage of the game. Parliament hasn't even sat yet. King Charles is coming to open it. But anyway, that's a whole different topic. What is the mood of Alberta right now? Are people upset? There was a huge rally at the legislature this past weekend. Looked like hundreds, maybe thousands.
And that was not a rally that was organized by any of the established groups or new political parties that have formed that are focused on separation. That was just a couple of concerned Albertans that decided, let's put on a rally. And it was very, very limited advertising. So I was quite surprised at the the hundreds of people that showed up. Everybody's talking about it, the idea of independence and separation. And they're also talking about the shock of the election and the realization that apparently there's millions of Canadians that are content with the disaster of the last 10 years and want 4 more years of it. So that's a real shocker. It's a gut punch to so many who, even staunch separatists, held out some hope that, to be blunt, some sanity would prevail. But, Carney announced, Trudeau racked up more debt than every other prime minister stacked on top of one another. And Carney announced he's going to take us even further in debt. That devalues the money in your bank account. That devalues that paycheck of the construction worker, of the tech worker. That makes everything more expensive. It contributes to inflation. It's remarkable. So a lot of what happened a week ago, Monday, with the federal election is so many Albertans that were on the fence just said, that's it. I'm done. We need a new path.
What is the spectrum of feelings across the province right now? If you take out the NDP, the leftists, which in Alberta are definitely the minority, are we talking disappointment, anger, rage even? Like, how does it feel there right now? Bubbling cauldron?
Be all of them, but definitely the talk of the town is this idea of independence. And, if you go into a restaurant and you can happen to overhear the conversation at the next table, you know what they're talking about. I saw a post today on X from someone who was walking the elevated pathways. They call it the upper 15 or something in Calgary. And just in the process of walking from, one office tower through the maze to get to another office tower, they crossed paths with 4 groups of different individuals, and she overheard what they were talking about, and it was independence. So there's definitely, and I think there's a combination of fear of the uncertainty of it. But there's also, there's an element of determination that we're just not going to put up with this. This is absolutely ridiculous. We have a federal government putting its knee on our economic neck and depriving my kids and my neighbors' kids and grandkids of a prosperous future. We're just not putting up with it anymore. So there's that. But there's also excitement. It's kind of like when dad talks about, hey, kids, when the kids are younger, we're going on a summer holiday this summer, where are we going, Dad? So there is a little bit of excitement about the adventure of what lays in front of us too.
It's interesting how many different groups there are all talking about this same topic. And I'm not sure if any of these groups are at war. I know that some of them are in disagreement. You'd mentioned that the rally at the Edmonton legislature, the Alberta legislature this past weekend was just a grassroots movement from some concerned Albertans who have had enough. We've got news from the Western Standard today that tells us the Alberta Republican Party has merged with another one of the parties. I think it's the Independence Party of Alberta. We still have the Alberta Prosperity Project out there doing their thing. Chris Scott did his gas stunt a couple of weeks ago down in Mirror. He was selling gas for 80 cents a liter just to show Albertans what it might be like in a independent Alberta. Is it possible for all of these groups to come together? I'm not sure how many others there are.
Well, it's interesting. You know my background, and
We
where
all
I
do.
got
Yes, we
where
all
I
do.
got parachuted into in February of 2022.
You're going to
And
be
what
the
was
guy that brings it all together, aren't you?
well, no. Let me share with you my experience of the last week.
Please.
And so, when I arrived in Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy, there was all these different groups, and some of them were more sophisticated than others. Some were ad hoc, some were long-standing, but they all had the same goal in mind. They all had the same outcome. Some of them had, warts and things that others didn't have, and challenges. But I said to my wife last week and others that this past week, with all the different phone calls I've had from leaders of the many groups, there's about 13 groups.
Whoa.
Between the political parties and then the ad hoc grassroots groups like Alberta Prosperity Project, that I was having flashbacks to being in Ottawa. And so I'm not frightened about that, because I saw what happened in Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy, which was a very flat structure. And the reason why I think that protest was successful was so many of the people, like just about every single one of them, was there for the same reason. They had the same list of concerns. They had the same list of objectives for themselves, most importantly, for their families and their community. And I'm seeing the exact same thing here. I'm seeing Albertans on their own articulate what they think's gone wrong in their relationship with Ottawa. And I'm seeing clarity, crystal clarity, of thought and description as to what they want to see happen for their future. So I'm not particularly concerned that we don't have one leader per se. There's lots of time. It'll evolve. And that's the significance of the Premier's announcement today. Is one of the uncertainties for me, as I've been mapping out the political chessboard, is the timeline. And now we have some certainty around that. And I think it's a very smart timeline because it's realistic. Part of me would like to see a referendum, a provincial referendum, where each eligible Alberta voter, so resident here of 6 months, over 19 years of age, that's a voter in Alberta. So if you want to vote in our referendum and you're in Ontario, you still have time to move here and buy some property.
Now,
you don't even
Jeff
have to buy
Rath from
property.
the
You
APP,
just have to be resident.
You know Jeff Rath,
Yes,
obviously.
I've known Jeff for many years, and him and I have spoken regularly. And I am very happy with his determination. His background in fighting for justice and recognition of treaty rights for 34 years, and successfully so. It's kind of funny that the left's tried to make this treaty thing into something it's just not.
Yeah, I do want to get into that, but
Yeah, you bet.
just in talking to Jeff, he was on with me 3 weeks ago, and he was pushing for a referendum. He's with APP, obviously one of the founding members of it, and he's pushing for a referendum before Christmas this year. Is that a doable thing, or is that just wishful thinking, just moving too fast?
Yeah, it's not possible when you look at the timelines, and I don't think it's prudent. I mean, that's what I was going to say. Is part of me was hoping, because in Alberta we have scheduled municipal elections every 4 years. It's a fixed date, okay? So, and it's for school boards as well. So school boards and all the local officials get elected on the same day. It's in October, and it's coming up. And in the past, it's very easy because you're assembling all the voting stations. You're going through all that process. It's very easy. And some municipalities will have their own plebiscite on whether they're building a new swimming pool or whatever. So it's be very easy to have a province-wide referendum. So part of me was thinking it might be this October. But the reality is, there's right now, if I were to be cautious and conservative about it, I'd say there's a third of the people in the province who will never, ever vote in favor of independence. And there's at least a third, that will, with 100% certainty, no matter what, vote for independence. And then there's that middle third. And to me, those are the people.
This sounds like COVID to me. It's it's amazing how many people believed the nonsense, didn't believe the nonsense, and that soft middle in between could go either way, right? They'll go with what they think is cool.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's such an economic decision, right? And it's an identity decision. I really do think Albertans will take it seriously. And there's legitimate questions to ask, as we're seeing people ask them, and helping people understand the details of the option of independence and what it would look like and how it fits in with Trump and 51. And I know we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Are all things that are going to take time to calmly explain, not in the chaos of rhetoric and hyperbole, but calmly lay out, here are the facts, here's the scenarios, so that people can make a truly informed decision on whether they think it's in their interest. And it's one vote. Doesn't matter, First Nations don't get 5 votes and I get 1. I don't get 5 votes and they get 1. Each voter gets 1 vote.
Let me ask you if the rhetoric has already started, because you just referenced it, and it's going to get hot very fast if it hasn't already. I mean, from my vantage point, I've been seeing First Nations. There was a counter protest in Edmonton this past weekend, pretty near the legislature. There was no face-to-face. There was no anger or rancor that I saw in any of the videos or the photos. But they were there making their case for their own treaty rights. And I'm not quite clear on that yet. But what about the left-wing corporate media? What about not just Alberta left-wing corporate media, but I mean, from Toronto, has there been any down talk from the Globe and Mail, the Star? Have you noticed any of that stuff starting yet? Because it will.
Oh, yeah. So we've got an hour, right? So I can take my time and break some of this down?
Dude, we've got as long as we need. Go ahead.
Okay. So can we just park the media for a second and let's focus on the treaty and the Aboriginal issue?
Yep.
If you're okay with that, Shadow. It's your show. I'm trying to. Yeah.
Dude, you want to talk about, you're here for a reason. So let's talk about the treaty rights first.
So first of all, there's an amazing guy on X that I just discovered last night, and he's Berta Dad. So Alberta without the A and the L. And he's First Nations, status Indian. He's got the card. And he pointed out, it's the most eloquent takedown of this argument that I've seen. He pointed out in mere minute and a half or something of this video, I've been trying to promote it, that the treaties are immutable. They're permanent. It doesn't matter whether the flag over top of the reserve is a Canadian flag, an Alberta flag, some new flag, or an American flag. They continue to have their treaty rights, and whatever government they're dealing with, whether it's Ottawa, the Canadian government, or whether it's the new Alberta government in the country of Alberta in Edmonton, or whether it's if this Trump thing were to happen, right? So the treaties, no one's talking about changing the treaties. No one's talking about not recognizing treaty rights. No one who's in support of separation, who's credible, is talking about that. And, who is the most experienced litigator in Canada fighting the federal government for 34 years to get them to honor treaty rights? The key spokesman for the Alberta Prosperity Project, Jeff Rath. And was one of the reasons they created the Alberta Prosperity Project, was because they were concerned about the treatment of First Nations in Alberta by the federal government. So that's point number one. The treaties remain the same. Calm down, everybody. And that's this message from this First Nations guy to his fellow First Nations. It's like, you guys, think about this for a minute. It doesn't matter what flag's there. It doesn't change the treaty rights. It just changes who you're dealing with, okay? Well, let's talk about that. Who are they dealing with now? Ottawa. They're all wards of Ottawa. There's thousands, tens and tens of thousands of Ottawa bureaucrats whose job it is to house First Nations. And we know, tongue in cheek, what a stellar job they've done at that, right? Like, give me a break. How does anybody responsible for delivering housing that works in Ottawa still have a job? Like, why are they not all fired? Oh, and then, of course, clean drinking water, right? So Jeff Rath and others will say, and I will say, you know what, guys? Maybe those guys in Ottawa actually haven't done such a good job for you, and maybe it might be a good opportunity here to see if Alberta can do a better job. So, and who decides? The First Nations decide. I've addressed this for years, actually, but more recently and more repeatedly because it keeps coming up. So if we get to the point where there's a citizen petition sufficient to trigger a referendum, and the referendum's held next year in 2026, each First Nation who's a resident of Alberta and older than 19 years of age will have the right for one vote, just like me, just like my wife, just like my neighbor. Okay. And if there is a vote in favor of separation, a clear majority of Albertans vote in favor of it, then the negotiations begin. And the Supreme Court of Canada has made clear in the 1998 reference decision regarding Quebec succession, and in the Clarity Act, or the Clarity Act addresses it as well, that negotiations have to begin with all the other provinces, the federal government, and First Nations. And they're all under a positive legal duty to enter into good faith negotiations. So the First Nations may decide as a group of Albertan, of the three treaties, 6, 7, and 8, all of the reserves individually may all decide they don't want to change. They want to keep having this incredible housing and crystal clear water delivered by these bureaucrats in Ottawa. They may just say, this is going so awesome, we don't want to risk changing it. And, dripping with sarcasm, obviously. Mm-hmm. Or they may say, you know what? Hey, Alberta, would you be interested in maybe opening up the treaties? They were kind of negotiated a real long time ago. Times have changed, and we might be interested in a different relationship. And one of the things that Jeff Raff talks about is the ability to offer true resource partnership ownership in a way that is just not possible under the current treaties or the control of Ottawa. And then, so one option would be for the First Nations to say, no, we're just going to carry on. You guys, Albertans, go do your thing. We're just going to carry on. And remember, there's reserves in Quebec, and I believe Ontario, but for sure Quebec, that straddle. What do they straddle? They straddle Quebec, Canada, and New York State, United States of America, right? See, there's a good example of how on one side of the reserve, they're flying a Canadian flag because that's the country that administers the treaty. And on the other side, they're flying an American flag.
So why are we seeing this First Nations rhetoric already so early in the process? Why are they, I don't mean to say this.
Because they blew it.
What do you mean?
I completely, I anticipated this. The smarter move would have been for them to lay back and see the timing of the chessboard. And instead they rushed out. And I think there have been concerns documented in various investigative reports and royal commissions and so on that have raised concerns about corruption in some of the reserves and how the leadership of some of the reserves seem to be paid a disproportionate amount of money. And so little money seems to get to the First Nations Aboriginal people living on the reserve.
Yes.
So if you're some of those people who are getting rewarded for your perpetuating this dysfunctional, failed relationship with Ottawa, maybe your first knee-jerk reaction is going to be to come out and defend Ottawa and create this narrative to dissuade people in Alberta who believe in separation and independence. So I think that's what's going on there to some extent. Some of it could just be a genuine lack of understanding of what's proposed. Some of them just may not actually understand that their treaties are immutable and it doesn't matter what flag. So I think that's it. And then, so just to recap a really important point here, in these negotiations that would come after a successful referendum, it is the First Nations that will decide their future. And one option is, as I've said, and I know I'm being repetitive on purpose, is status quo. Nothing changes, including the bad housing and bad water. Another is a new relationship with Alberta, or another one is asking Alberta to step into the shoes of the existing treaties. So the treaties remain the same. And instead of having government officials in Ottawa look after your housing, you would have government officials in Edmonton, in the new country of Alberta, looking after your housing. And then the third option is to enter into some modified new relationship. So, but the reality, the important point is it will be the First Nations deciding that, not Albertans and not Canadians.
I find that interesting because, as you pointed out, there is some, it's been said, there is some corruption out there, and many of the leadership groups in some of the reserves, they have been actively lying publicly since the public became aware of the Kamloops residential school graves. I don't want to call them graves because apparently it was just some water system that was
septic field.
The septic field that was put in the ground 100 years ago. There were no actual bodies found there, and yet they continue to be satisfied with lying and calling anybody else who, contradicts them a liar and a bigot and a racist and somebody who should be shut down and censored. And that, it seems to me that kind of attitude, it permeates through some of the First Nations. I mean, politically speaking anyway. So are they affiliated with any of and we know that they mostly vote NDP or Liberal, depending on what kind of election it is, whether it's provincial or federal. Do we see any alliance between them and the federal government or the left wing in this country? I guess we can only speculate on that.
Yeah, I mean, I just say this, that what's just so important to me is they get to decide. I don't think it's proper for me to decide for them. And I think it's very important that everyone understand that they will have the choice. They will have the choice to keep status quo and keep the treaties administered by the federal government, or they may decide and say, sorry, federal government, we'd like to try it with Alberta. And then federal government says, okay, we'll step out, and Alberta will step into our shoes and hopefully do a better job than we have. Sorry, we blew it for so many years. And then the third option would be for some or all to say, you know what, let's try a new approach. We've got to try something new because we've got chronic poverty and we've got low life expectancy in terms of mortality in our communities, and we've got to do better. So, but the most important thing is they're in control of those decisions, and that's where I think they should be.
So the campaign, I would imagine, has already begun, and I'm understanding that there are many different groups across the province who have already started petitions. And this is why I ask about a joining together of all of the different groups. I think one petition would probably be the best thing. Either that or sign them all, right?
Okay, so let's talk about the details, because it's a great question, Shadow. So it's not any piece of paper. So if anybody prints off a thing called a petition and trying to get you to sign it, you can sign it, but that's not the legal one. It's just like if you're going to a voting booth and some Johnny's standing out there and he's handing out pieces of paper that he made with crayon, you wouldn't go, oh, great, this looks like an official ballot to me. I guess I better go use it, make sure I get my X right, right? No, you want that so it's the same thing. Elections Alberta goes through a vetting process. There's an application process that an Albertan has to go through when they say, I want to start a citizen initiative petition. It has to meet certain characteristics. It gets reviewed and vetted to ensure it meets all those legal criteria. Then the chief electoral officer will tell you how many signatures you need to get to meet the threshold, what's your number, and will tell you when your 120 days is going to start.
So Bill 54 that was introduced last week by Danielle Smith, are they expecting that to pass quickly? Or are they going to stay in session over the summer to make that happen? Or is that something that's down the road a bit?
I'm pretty sure session closes either this week or next week. So it'll be law very soon.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and that's it's normal for session, the spring lesson. It's called spring legislative session, not summer, right? So it normally wraps around this time, or in mid to third week of May.
Well, now my question was that, like, I mean, because I know that it takes time to pass a bill occasionally.
No, it doesn't. You could literally pass, if a government really wanted to, they could pass a bill for sure in 2 days. Because all you got to do is stand up and say, Bill, and I make up a number, Bill 99 is hereby read a first time. Motion to dispense with reading the bill. All in favor? Yeah. Okay. Sit down. Back on the order paper. Okay. Or I'd like to move that Bill 99 be read a second time. I'm doing that. This is how much you'd have to actually do it in real time. Okay. Like,
wow.
And then I dispense with reading of the bill. Yeah. Okay. And they go, okay, motion to move into committee of the whole. Any amendments? No. And then they invoke closure. And then they would go to third reading. I move that bill, the 99 be read a third time. Yep. All in favor. Yep. Passes. Okay. Send it over to Lieutenant Governor, royal assent, signature, boom, law. It doesn't, when you got a majority, you could put something through the House if you really wanted to extremely quickly.
But
I don't see any urgency here. And I don't think the government's treating it any different than any other bill. They've brought in legislation to amend other aspects of elections, like we're not going to be doing electronic tabulator for all of our votes. They're going to be counted by humans that can't be recoded. And other legislation regarding healthcare, education, and so on. All those bills, policing, they'll all pass because they have the majority. They have the sufficient. The opposition might filibuster and spend them into some late nights, and they'll be bringing in, skip the dishes at 2 a.m. as they work the night shift in the legislature, but they'll get her done. I'm not anticipating any issue there. And so what happens though is, back to the petition, the citizen petition, is it's a legal form of paper specifically designed and approved by Elections Alberta. And then you get volunteers that have these official versions, and they can go door to door, or they can go to their local curling club or their baseball team, or set up in a mall parking lot, or put on a town hall meeting and have them there. And people have to put their name, their address, their phone number, and maybe something else, and sign it.
So this is not, it can't be done electronically. This has got to be
no electronic. No.
Okay.
And at least that's my understanding, unless they make a further amendment, but it stands right now, it will be paper ballots with ink signatures. Then those go to Elections Alberta, and Elections Alberta will count them and say, okay, Donald J. Trump, Sherwood Park, Alberta, and don't think so, right? That one's not real. Santa Claus, whatever.
Donald Duck is always a big one.
What's that?
Donald Duck is always a big one.
Yeah, Donald Duck. Yeah, all the Disney characters show up. So then they will confirm the number, and if the number is confirmed, so it used to be 600,000 because we had two different standards. If Albertans wanted legislation or a policy change, they had to get 10% of a 10% threshold, and then 30% or 20% if it was constitutional. And the premier looked at how it's done in other jurisdictions, California and other places, and they don't have a differential. If it's a citizen initiative, it's a citizen initiative. So she said it should be the same. We shouldn't be making this into a snakes and ladders board that's mostly snakes and no ladders. So she's amended and announced that last week, the day after the election, that instead of needing 600,000 signatures on a petition to force the Alberta government to hold an independence referendum, rather than needing 600 signatures to force that, we now need about 177,000. And we're definitely going to get that. So once we have that 177,000 confirmed by the Chief Electoral Office, he then advises the government of Alberta. It then sets in process the actual referendum, and the various camps will engage in their education campaigns as to what they think, whether you should be voting yes for independence and separation, or whether you should be voting no. and that this is where the legacy media is going to show up. And because at some, it's sort of been the case to now, well, not sort of, it's absolutely been the case that the arrogance of the Laurentian elite and the Ottawa crowd, that they just, and so many of them have, frankly, from my experience and some of my interactions, no idea about how diversified Alberta's economy is. It's not just oil. They have no idea. And I'm not talking about necessarily the technocrats, but so many people, it seems, in central and eastern Canada have no idea that Alberta owns just about the entirety of the land base of the province. They have no idea that we have 4 military bases in Alberta. One of them alone is larger than the cumulative land mass of all the military bases in Ontario, right? They don't know that, Alberta owns the oil and gas. They actually think it's the federal government. They think crown land means federal crown. I'm just astounded at the lack of basic civics understanding that I'm hearing from people. And they don't realize that Albertans, we net pay at, on average, $30 billion more to Ottawa than we get back.
Yearly?
So,
is that a yearly number?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Yearly. You should compare the GDP of Alberta to Ontario. Well, and compare our export values. Search up what the annual dollar value is for exports from Alberta total, and then compare Ontario. Ontario is, nothing. Alberta just thumps them. It's 100 and something billion versus it's just, you do the comparison. I wish I had them at my fingers, and I will next time. So they just don't understand. So some people say, well, good luck paying for your health care, because they think Ottawa pays for it. Well, Ottawa might pay for it in other provinces, but they don't pay for it here. So of all the money we send to Ottawa each year, we don't get 30 billion of it back. And that's when the Premier was talking about this in her speech today. So instantly out of the gate, Alberta will have $30 billion more. And it ranges. It can be, I think the lowest I saw was 17 billion. I've seen 27 billion. It depends on how the economy is doing and other factors. But we're going to have billions of dollars laying around in our pocket to pay for the things that traditionally have been paid for by the federal government, one of which is running passport offices. Now, I don't know if we're going to be able to replicate that 5-star concierge service, that you get at a passport office. No.
Go sit and wait in that chair, and I'll talk to you sometime this afternoon, maybe. Or you'll probably have to come back
you get
tomorrow.
in this line to talk to someone, to get another number, to get into that line, to wait to talk to someone, to get in the other line. Yeah, you get it. And so on. And their websites that seem to be designed by a committee whose job it is to drive you crazy, right? Because
idea.
You have to pick a time to book your reservation to go to the passport office. And it's like, oh no, it's not available at that time. Try another location. Oh, because of your postal code, you can't use the other location. It's just like, okay, guys.
No, I went through that today renewing my driver's license. I totally understand. Well, there's 10 people in front of you. You might want to go to a different office. Yeah, but I'm here now.
Right.
But those men over there, they're all waiting. Do you have to get your picture done? It was just a whole process. And I think it's designed that way, just to make people go away.
I took us on a digression. I apologize, but let me say this.
And I continued on the digression.
Yeah.
So I apologize.
Well, we're both guilty then. But it's, the point is that up to this time, Ottawa hasn't taken this seriously, hasn't taken Albertans' desires for change and our determination to deal with it and resolve it seriously at all. And in fact, to the extent they've acknowledged it, it's been mocking. They mocked the Premier. They mocked Premier Smith. Carney did 2 weeks into the campaign trail, right? And it was misogynistic type nonsense he said too. But in any event, so I think what's going to happen here is they're going to start to do the math, and they're going to start to go, oh boy, if Alberta leaves, how are we going to afford all of this stuff? How the Canadian pension plan's in trouble. The only reason it's still in existence is because of Alberta, because we have a younger population and they work more and earn more than people in the other parts of the country. And as a result, they're contributing more. And so many of the retirees in central Canada are able to be retirees because of the hard work of young Albertans. And we know that.
It's interesting, isn't it, when we look at it and go, all right, so Alberta fronts the money essentially for all of these folks out there with their elbows up who were voting for Mark Carney just last week. And you're right. I mean, they have no idea exactly how much, but just imagine how much richer Alberta would be, Keith, if, you know, the federal government wasn't there to have their boot on Alberta's economic neck, and they didn't have to sell. Alberta didn't have to sell their oil at a massive discount to the United States. They could sell it worldwide. What I ask now is, somebody was talking today, and I've been talking about this for quite some time, and the landlocked question has always come up, even if Saskatchewan goes as well. And I'm going to have Nadine Ness from Unified Grassroots on the show on Thursday night. She's already been attacked for wanting to start an independence referendum petition on her own in the legislature of Saskatchewan by the NDP today. But where are they going to go with the pipelines if you're dealing with a landlocked province and then maybe another landlocked province joins in a year or two later?
So let's deal with this. Well, first of all, the main east-west main line in the United States that connects to the ports on the west coast of Seattle and Portland and San Diego, or San Francisco, all that stuff. And even there's a lot of ports through Oregon and Washington State that aren't big city ports. That main line, that main east-west line, and as it goes east, goes to the lakehead within the United States, and then off through the entire rail network, and also straight down to Houston and Galveston and so on. That main east-west rail line is exactly 30 miles south of the Alberta border at Shelby. Okay. And the railway that merged with CP, Kansas City, or Kansas Southern, sorry, it's KS, is now a large North American rail company. And guess where their head office is? Calgary, Alberta. Okay. So because we haven't been able to trade with the East, we've built this trading infrastructure north-south. Our trade's north-south. Our cattle go south. Our oil goes south. Our lumber goes south. Our pulp goes south. South. Not east. Some east, but not much. And the oil and gas, as I hope people know now, that goes east actually goes through the United States, through Line 5, crosses over by Sarnia, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't even go across Canada. But, all right, Port of Vancouver. Think containers from China and Malaysia and Vietnam and Indonesia and all of these places where we get our clothing and all the stuff we buy at a Walmart and a Canadian Tire store and a Home Depot. 75% of that container traffic that lands in Vancouver goes east of Alberta, goes to Manitoba, to Ontario, to Quebec, and points eastward. So my question is, for Ontario, is how are they going to get those goods if they think that we're landlocked? Are we landlocked or are they landlocked?
I guess you'd both be landlocked if you're looking at it like that.
Right. So I think we're going to say to BC, all right, well, you don't want us to have a pipeline. Well, we don't want your goods to come across our country then. And I hope it would never come to that bluntness, but it's just in no one's interest to not facilitate this type of trade. And Alberta has the option of shifting south and then east-west. Remember, the main line, east-west rail line, is 30 miles from the Alberta border, from the Montana-Alberta border in Shelby, Montana. So we have options. BC won't. They may be able to ship south and try and get around us, but then they're going to have to be dealing with the Americans. They can't go north. So it's not that simple. I'm not worried about the landlocked argument. Most of our trade is north-south anyway. And to the extent that we need increased access to the West Coast, we'll at least have leverage. Right now, we have a federal government that's made ideologically extremist policies to block us from having that access.
So you're a constitutional guy. Let's walk through this. Let's just say, let's move ahead in time a year, and let's just say that 55% of Albertans, once the official totals are in, have said, yeah, we want to be an independent nation. What is the next step after that? You've got 55%, you've got the majority. What now?
Well, you enter negotiations, and
now, what does that look like, Keith? I mean, we sit down at a table, so now you've got.
I can tell you what it would look like, because look, I'm a litigator.
Yeah.
I have real litigation files.
Yeah,
and very
I know,
expensive
man.
ones. Like the
yes.
highest value file I would do would be $1 billion, and I'm very commonly dealing with ones in hundreds of millions, and a lot that are under 100 million. And they're often multi-party. And guess what? Everybody hates one another. Nobody wants to do a deal. Everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's got an interest. And what ends up happening is we go into negotiations, and usually it's fronted by the lawyers. And I know people hate lawyers. That's fine. Some days I hate lawyers too, especially if I'm having difficult negotiations. And
lawyers.
I know. But we work it out. We build contingencies in. We try to figure out ways to address people's concerns and issues, and say, okay, how can we get a win-win here? And if you're going to have a lose somewhere, so if my client's in such a situation and we know we're not going to get the win in a particular area, well, is there somewhere else we can get a win? Because this other side really wants this thing that we're now going to lose, this piece of it, because there's always lots of pieces to it. It's never simple. It's always really complex. I just see this being the exact same thing, but instead of notionally having, 10 or 15 clients in the room, there's going to be 40 million.
Right. So what I'm asking here is, what would be on the table? Would there be certain buildings, certain pieces of land? How would this?
So here's what we know. So most provinces, and Alberta including, it's the province. And again, the lack of understanding of average Canadians on this, I just find actually troubling. They just don't seem to know who delivers what, and they just have this mythology that it's the federal government, and it's not. The federal government does very, very little. They cost us a fortune and harm us, but they don't do a lot. So all the hospitals are provincial, so we don't have to deal with that. All the schools are provincial. All the universities are provincial. All the jails, but for a few federal penitentiaries, are provincial. The roads are provincial. Even the Trans-Canada Highway is provincial, right? There's a funding arrangement in it because it's Trans-Canada, but it's, when you drive the Trans-Canada through Manitoba and you get a speeding ticket, do you get it under some Canada Transport Act, or Trans-Canada Speed Limit Act? No, it's the provincial statutes that apply. The right-of-way is owned by the province where the road is. So many things would remain the same, but we would need to deal with things like, first of all, the national parks. So Alberta has 4 national parks: Waterton, Banff, Jasper, and Wood Buffalo. Wood Buffalo is huge. It's way at the northern part of the province. There's no roads into almost all of it. So we would have to either say to the federal government, do you want to keep them? And we'll draw the boundaries of our new country around you, because they're all on borders. all of our national parks are on a border with BC or the Northwest Territories, or possibly Yukon. I'm not clear on that one. In any event, so there would be a negotiation as to if we are to acquire the national parks from the federal government, what are we going to pay? Similarly with the military bases, because as I mentioned earlier, we have 4 military bases in Alberta, as to what the purchase price would be for that infrastructure and whether we buy it with equipment inside it or not. They can have a moving day and take all their stuff out, and we would have to, so that would be something Alberta would have to deal with, is building up its own military. But we're going to have significant revenues kept in the province that we're currently not sending to Ottawa that we can do that with, as well as the ability to increase our production, because we're going to get rid of these production caps, these no more pipeline laws, and all of these these legislative steps that the federal government has taken or is about to take that curtail our economic prosperity. Other things we would have to negotiate and be determined, or not negotiated, but we would have to develop a passport office. We would have to develop a border system of having checkpoints at borders. Well, but only on 3 sides, because we already got them on one side for the Americans. But these are all very practical things to do. We all know how to build a building at a border and put up lights and signs as to where you pull up to and have a restroom. Like, it's,
well, the way
not
stations are already there anyway, right? So just expand.
Well, exactly. And that's another example. So there would be that. There's a banking and monetary policy. I think the easiest thing would be to allow, I remember one time I was, years ago, I was in Florida went to Disney World or something with the kids, and I saw this RBC bank, and I thought, oh, wow. And then I saw Scotia Bank. I thought, oh, I didn't realize. So if RBC can be in Florida and Scotiabank can be in Texas, RBC and Scotiabank can be in Alberta. Alberta has its own banks. We have Alberta Treasury Banks, Western Canadian Bank and stuff already.
Bow Valley.
So, there would be a need to deal with consulars, setting up consuls and embassies in other countries. Policing, whether we're going to adopt the criminal code as is, I think the simplest thing, and there's going to be work done on all of these issues. So I'm just giving you some imagery and ideas as opposed to precision here on these points. Is, the easiest thing would be to adopt the current legal system, and then decide what parts of the criminal code the new government of Alberta doesn't like, because they will have criminal law powers. So we don't have to defer to catch and release policies of the federal Liberals. But when you look at the few things that the federal government does, Alberta can easily take those over. And I think we can only potentially do it better, because the federal government's been really bad at just about everything that it's tried to do.
At least for the last 10 years. So would it be Danielle Smith's government in control of these negotiations? Remembering that she's been elected as the premier of Alberta, not a national leader. It's a different situation. Would the people from the Independence Party, the Alberta Republicans, would they be invited in to confer? I mean, how would that work? Or would it just be Danielle and her government?
Well, Danielle's mandate, there's no requirement for an Alberta election until, I believe it's the fall of 2027. So, assuming, and you can never, Albertans will vote out leaders they don't like. We've seen that. Mr. Kenney experienced that, and others before him, Mr. Stelmach, others. Assuming that Premier Smith continues to have the sort of Albertans, and I'm hopeful she will, because I have a great deal of respect for her, and I think we're blessed to have her as our premier. Constitutionally, it is the government, the representatives of the government of each province. So it would be the premier or whoever she sends to the negotiations.
I'm wondering if she even wants it, because she said in her speech today that she is in favor of a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada, whatever that means. I want to play a clip here for you, because
Sure.
We've been referring, and this is like a 14-second clip. We've been referring to Quebec as an independent Quebec inside of a sovereign sovereign Quebec inside of a united Canada now since the Harper days. And they do seem to have a great deal of autonomy in the decisions they make as compared to other provinces, but they never signed the Constitution Act of 1982. But watch, this is Yves-Francois Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc, about 2 days before the election.
We are, either we like it or not, part of an artificial country with very little meaning called Canada. Many people in Canada write to me and say, we'd like to have the same as Quebec has.
What does he mean by that?
I don't know.
Artificial country with little meaning? I mean, does he know something that we don't know?
An observer might say, when they look at the size of the country, second largest country in the world by landmass, and they look at the cultural diversity and the economic diversity, is there sufficient homogeneity? Do we have enough in common to really be a viable country? I don't know. I've observed the cultural variation from east to west. I've observed the cultural variation from, the Vancouver coastline to Alberta. And maybe he's right on that. But what I do know for certain, having studied this very carefully, is that there's little opportunity for my kids and grandkids in a future Canada with the direction that the voters in Eastern Canada have continually decide for the future of this country, printing money over restrictions, governments supposedly going to keep people safe, which just means take away their freedoms.
Mass immigration.
And then I compare it to what opportunities and the prosperity and the potential for achievement that exists if Alberta were to become independent. It's just, the conclusion's obvious.
But you did see during the Freedom Convoy, the nation come together. You did see Quebec guys shaking hands and playing street hockey with Alberta guys, Saskatchewan guys, people from everywhere, from the Maritimes and Newfoundland. I mean, maybe that was the last great Canadian gathering.
Well, you can certainly say we gave it a good try, for sure. But, what's interesting is, that in the last days of the campaign, one of the strategies that the Liberals were using was to associate Poilievre with the convoy.
Yep.
Like it was a bad thing. It was a POC, right? So I just think, clearly, given the election results, and not just the election results, I was cautioning people a year ago when they were getting excited about this landslide conservative victory that was proposed. And, you'd have Poilievre, the Conservatives, at 49% or 47%, and then the Liberals at 38%, and then the NDP at 14%. And I'd say, could you add together the red bar and the orange bar for me, please? And they'd go, oh my God.
Yeah.
And I would say, so what you're facing here is a majority of Canadians, after what we've been through with COVID and the government's reaction to it and its overreaction, the mandates, the stripping of fundamental rights, the forcing us into taking an experimental drug, and all of the things that we know about harming our children by taking them out of school, business closures, and so on. And then all these radical extremist policies, carbon taxes, everything else. And a majority of Canadians are saying, yeah, I like that. I want more of it.
Let's keep it.
So maybe, maybe the illusion, maybe what we saw in Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy as a unifying moment, maybe it was an illusion. Maybe our friend from Quebec is correct. I don't know. But I can't change that. Not only he's asking me to, obviously, but what I do know is that I can potentially change the opportunities for my kids. And I think many Albertans feel that way. And that's why they're now so excited and motivated to support independence.
So let's go back to the beginning when we talked about 33% would absolutely support Alberta independence. 33% would definitely stay with the federal government, and that soft middle 34% of people. You're going to have an onslaught on your hands, Keith. I mean, when you,
betcha.
when you bring, and this is something that I was talking about last week, and I heard you talking with Ezra about, I think last week as well. You sent me the clip, and I watched it again. But I was talking about the people who were behind the independence movement or the independence movements in Alberta, and there's a lot of money there. I know that there's a lot of people who have a lot of individual wealth who are definitely supporting the independence movement, and so from that, you would be able to create a massive marketing campaign, a massive advertising campaign, billboards, social media, TV. Of course, that's if TV allowed you to advertise on their channels, because we know how that's been going lately. But what do you think every single federal party, including the Conservatives, would probably be speaking out saying, no, you can't leave. You've got to stay. So the Liberals, Conservatives, the NDP, all of the provincial NDP and lefties would be going against you. The media would be going against you. Name calling, slander. I mean, I know that you've been through all of that with the Freedom Convoy and several other people as well, some high profile people. Can you withstand that in order to win that middle 34%? And you don't even really need them all. You only need maybe 22% of that 34% to get a yes vote. Let's get the hell out of here. Is it doable? Can you make it the cool thing, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, we could do that. But here's what I've said to a number of the key people involved in the other groups as we've had discussions over the last number of weeks. I've said, and I would hear some of them say things to me, and I'm going, oh boy, you are not seeing what's coming, man. Because I got the scars from Ottawa, right?
Yeah.
So I know what it's like. And your first guy through the wall always gets bruised, right? And we're all going through the wall first time here. So what I've cautioned them is right now, as I mentioned earlier, and we've just talked about Shadow, is that Ottawa really never took this seriously. And to any extent they talked about it was mocking. Now I think they're going to start to take it serious. And because they're going to take it serious, we're going to suffer bot attacks. We're going to see hyperinflated themes and stories coming from the legacy media, because the legacy media, and you and I've talked about this before, because I used to be interviewed a lot on my different high profile cases back in the day when the legacy media got 0% of its funding from Ottawa and now gets hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and a good chunk of every paycheck of every reporter comes from Ottawa, and they need to pay mortgages too, or pay more commonly rent, because they can't afford to get a house to have a mortgage. But so they're going to serve the paymaster, and there's going to be propaganda coming at us. I've said to these guys, like, you have never experienced before, dirty tricks, false allegations, everything. They're going to see this. If they think that the closer it becomes real, the dirtier they're going to get. And we've seen from their history, the Liberals, that they'll play dirty. And, and there's another factor that's going to come into this too, is the Jerry Maguire effect, which...
Who's coming with me?
Right. But what ends up happening is they start to resent you. I had this happen when I left a big firm and went off to set up my own firm. And at first it was because everybody was mad at the partners. They thought the partners weren't treating everybody well. And I took a bunch of people with me, and they're like, yeah, you're showing it to the man. But then they went through this psychological transition over a couple of weeks where it's like, well, wait a minute. I don't like working here. I'd really like to go, but I've got nowhere to go. Well, maybe this place isn't so bad, and that Wilson guy's not a good guy. Right. So you went from high fives walking down the hallway to people not making eye contact, or maybe putting their shoulder into you as you walk past the photocopier. Right. So we're going to have this tension where, Nova Scotia gets at least a quarter of its budget from transfer payments from Alberta. Where are those billions going to come from? They're going to come from the auto workers getting taxed more in Ontario. So it's going to be a hell of a rough ride.
What if this referendum does happen in a year's time? And for those of you just joining us right now, this is Keith Wilson, veteran senior attorney, a lot of battle scars, a lot of negotiations. You may remember Keith, obviously, from the Freedom Convoy. Um, Danielle Smith said today that if there is a citizen-initiated petition for separation or independence, that the government would honor it. And so let's just say we do have this referendum in a year's time, but you only get 45%. Does the movement die, or does it just keep going?
I don't know. You know, and one thing we haven't talked about yet is, and I'm going to bring it up now, you know, I'm a strategist, right? So I game things out. I always try and game things out. I get to a fork in the road. Okay, this could have, this happens, and let's go down there. Okay, then this could happen. Let's go down there. Let's go back up to this fork, go down. You just game out, game out, game out. You have to do that in litigation. Nothing can be a surprise. You have to game out all the scenarios, and whatever strategy you make has to work for every scenario. So I've done that a number of times, and I don't necessarily do it on paper, because if you see my office, I got 12 screens, so I do everything usually digital. But every time I've done it, I do the voter overlay of education campaign for Albertans and where are they at, and then I do the Carney analysis. Which Carney do we have? You know, do we have the conservative platform stealing Carney, or the net zero Gabo on steroids Carney?
That's the guy.
And then I go to do the third level of the chessboard, which is Trump. And I take everything I've done and I sweep it off the table, because he's so, as we all know, unpredictable. Now, what we do know is that he's a land developer, and land developers always like to acquire more land. He brought up the idea of acquiring things in Canada before anybody else did. And he also knows that Alberta has the third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world. He knows, even though he won't say anything about it, that their reservoirs are all going down because they've been drill, baby, drill. Doesn't replenish, doesn't refill overnight, right? And he needs to reestablish his strategic reserve. Our strategic reserve is 30 or 18,000 meters underground. You can't even bomb it. You just got to pull it out with a pump and put it through a pipeline. So, and then we have all the other resources and the trade that we do with the US, and how we're becoming a dominant place for data centers and AI, because one of the biggest problems with data centers is cooling them, which is not a problem when it's minus 30, which it is a lot here, right? And all these other things. And we've got the natural gas to take natural gas plants and put data centers on the plant, because the fuel supply is right there. You make it a cogen and boom, you don't even have a transmission line to worry about. So there's all kinds of diversification that's been occurring in our economy. People think it's monolithic. It's not. And then we have all our agricultural goods and our food and our beef and all of these other things. So Trump is likely going to want Alberta, and he's going to see a negotiation going on. And boy, you know, that guy loves to show up at a negotiation, right? So he may make some kind of offer to Canada, to Alberta, that completely upsets the balance. It could potentially even backfire, as we've seen. Trunk derangement syndrome could occur. It's interesting. Of the third of the people, and it's probably a higher percentage, that I know want to separate, there's a group within there, and I don't know, it's not half, but it's not insignificant, that are absolutely committed to independence, but absolutely opposed to becoming the 51st state. So it's complex.
You know, Steve Bannon was talking about it. Steve Bannon was talking about it last week on a podcast. I'm not sure if it was in his War Room podcast or if he was talking with somebody else about it. And he mentioned Alberta and Saskatchewan by name. And that's the first time that I had heard any American media talk about that particular scenario.
And think about Saskatchewan, though, because Saskatchewan has, and a lot of people don't know this, that Saskatchewan has a reasonable amount of oil and gas down in the southeastern part of their province, but nothing compared to Alberta. But still, it's important. And they have all the agricultural production, which is amazing. But they have two other things. They have the largest reserve of potash. And what's potash, for people who don't know what potash is? It's underground. You mine it underground, and it's almost like a salt mine. You know, it comes out as a granular. It's white. They put it in rail cars. It goes down to the US, in Iowa and so on, and the farmers put it into their tractor. It's called fertilizer. It's natural fertilizer. There's no processing involved, or next to none. And they have the largest reserve of that. So now Trump secures the ability to fertilize without having to make chemical fertilizer from natural gas and all the costs associated with that. And Saskatchewan either has the largest or one of the world's largest reserves of uranium. And he's big into nuclear power. All of their military or important elements of their military run off of nuclear. So for him to get Alberta and Saskatchewan would just, the benefits it would provide, the prosperity, the security, the economic boost it would give to the United States, the largest economy in the world, under threat from China and elsewhere. He could probably put, he might even throw in some Trump watches for all we know.
Why are people
but isn't
so
it just, if you pause for a minute,
Yep.
like think about that. Like, so Trump sees that as an opportunity, and Ottawa says no. You just work harder with what you have. We're not going to let you produce more. We're not going to give you pipeline access. We're going to have a tanker ban. We're going to force you to force out natural gas electricity generation. We're going to make you all drive electric vehicles when it's minus 30, and all of these other nonsensical, ideologically extremist laws with their knee on our economic neck.
Do you believe that it's possible to reverse people's ideas of joining the United States? Is this Trump derangement syndrome a deep thing, or is it something that you can snap people out of? Because
here's
that
what
is
I think.
what's stopping this. I mean,
it's going to zing. I'm going to zing and zang on you here.
Okay.
So one of the things that I picked up on that I did not see coming and would have not have predicted is there's Alberta's had the largest net immigration of all the provinces in Canada. And some of that's been, refugees from Ontario and stuff, conservative refugees from other parts of the country.
From all over.
But
a
lot of it's from economic refugees from other countries. And a lot of them didn't pick Canada as their first pick. They picked the United States. And they took Alberta or Canada as their second pick. So they came here because they wanted the economic opportunity for their children and for themselves and their grandkids. So if they right now are thinking, no, I'd never support separation, don't really think about it, still trying to adjust to living in Canada. And then suddenly they hear, wait a minute, I could suddenly have an American citizenship and I don't have to move. And wait a minute, I can get all of these other things. So I think, even though there might be some people who would vote for independence right now who are totally against the 51st state concept, there's others who are on the fence or maybe a no to independence that would become yes once they see that opportunity. So it's very volatile, but I do fundamentally believe that what's happening here with the federal government and its approach is so glaringly wrong, and so many people see it. As I mentioned earlier, the debt, the deficit. This Liberal government has accumulated more debt just themselves than every other government in the history of our country stacked on one another. And Carney wants to take it further.
He does.
Venezuela, here we come.
Interesting. Somebody was saying on X last week, and I thought, is this real? I'll ask Keith next week. If Alberta leaves, we're saddled with a certain amount of the national debt, or would that be completely and totally exempt, or is that a negotiable thing?
That would be one of the items that you would negotiate for sure, is what portion of the debt. But you'd also negotiate taking out our contribution to the Canada Pension Plan. And if you account for that and pull it out, the federal government would owe us money, right? So but those would all be things that would need to be negotiated. I don't see, to people who don't engage and haven't had experience in very complex multi-party negotiations, they may think this is impossible. And really, I just see it as another file. I just see it as another complex dispute where sophisticated people need to get in a room and figure out a path to resolution. And also too, that the paragraph 155 of the Supreme Court of Canada decision in the reference case and then do an overlay of Trump on that. What I expect the Americans will do is that they will indicate at some point here that they will recognize Alberta's right to self-determination, that the Americans, whether it's the State Department or the president or someone, will say, we know there's the situation going on in Canada, and we respect the right of Albertans to choose their destiny and have self-determination. The American government's done this in other instances where there's a upheaval in some countries around the world. And then I think the next thing they might do is say, well, if the referendum is in favor of separation, international states can give recognition, even where the home country doesn't agree. Think Taiwan, right? So a number of countries, including Canada, have recognized Taiwan, even though according to the Chinese constitution, Taiwan is part of China, right? So one of the options the Americans will have is to give international recognition to Alberta. And they can do it in a way that Ottawa knows that, because they'll do it publicly on the open airways, on X or social. And Alberta will have that advantage going into the negotiation. That if everybody wants to play silly bugger and not engage in good faith negotiations, you've got Trump already signaling perhaps that he will give international recognition. And paragraph 155 of the Supreme Court of Canada 1998 reference case expressly says that's another way for, if there is an impasse in negotiations, for a province to succeed and achieve independence.
What do you see? Is it going to be a smooth? I mean, let's say this happens. Would it be a smooth road for Alberta, or would there be some hard times for a few months, even a few years at the very beginning when all the transition's underway? What kind of government might they form? More of a United States style elected head of state situation, elected Senate, all of that stuff? Completely and totally remove ourselves from the king, the royal family?
So I'm happy about the timeline that the Premier announced today, because those are all proper questions. And I don't know the answers to some of them. And we need to bring the people together to have good discussions about what form of government a new independent Alberta would have, what form of laws we would apply, how we would deal with borders and immigration, all of these 7 or 8 things that the federal government does, because it's only that many, and canvass the options, and then build a model as to what it would look like, so that Albertans can make an informed choice, that they know what they're leaving and know what they're going into. And that's going to take a year. And we have a year now. So I think that's good.
It just, like, what happens to the rest of Canada? Because when Alberta goes, we know Saskatchewan is going to follow. I think the sentiment for sovereignty in Saskatchewan, according to polls anyway, is even higher than it is in Alberta right now. And again, nobody has taken a poll since the election last week. I believe they probably should. Quebec is going to be talking about separation again when the Parti Québécois wins the next Quebec election, which is inevitable. They've been leading all the polls now for the past year and a half. What does that leave? Manitoba, Ontario, BC, separated completely from the rest of the country, and the same with Atlantic Canada? Does it just become a disparate group of regions?
Maybe. I don't know. And,
I don't care.
Yeah. Well, I do care, because I'm human and I'm empathetic, and
Of course.
I do.
Yeah.
But I am a little tired of the rest of Canada taking Alberta for granted and saying that they don't care. Like I saw Anita Anand, she went on, was a couple days ago, when the GM plant at Oshawa announced the layoffs because of tariff-related issues. And we had hundreds of thousands of people lose their job due to these crazy policies 8 years ago. And they just said, suck it up, Alberta. You rednecks, go get a job in IT, was basically the answer we got. Sucks to be you. And so, there is a level of anger out here as to how badly we've been treated. And unfortunately, that can cause people not to be as empathetic as otherwise, but the rest of Canada's going to have to figure it out. One thing's for sure, they're going to pay a lot more in taxes, and their dollar's not going to be worth as much because sugar daddy's leaving.
Yeah, it just seems like a dream here that we're in right now. And I imagine that Alberta is going to be a pretty raucous place over the next year. Have you looked at the other side? Because you're a strategist, as you were pointing out. Have you looked at the other side's tactics and the things that they might do from media or even a political stance to try and defame you? Have you looked at the worst of the worst things that they could possibly do?
Yeah, I mean, but, been there, done that. I'm still here, right?
But is there anything even worse that they could do?
Oh, potentially, of course. But I don't worry about that, honestly. But more strategically, they're going to be pushing the fear button left, right, and center. They're going to be capitalizing on the lack of knowledge and understanding that most Canadians have about what the limited role of the federal government. They're going to embellish their role, and they're going to make people think they're going to lose something. What's interesting here, the Liberals, Trudeau was master at this. His best tactic was always division, right? Division. That's why if things were really bad happening, he'd suddenly, out of the blue, announce a $300 million new grant program for LGBTQ plus in Africa. Yep. Right? Because he knew it would piss off people in Alberta and on the right, right? Just a pure distraction move. Well, that won't work this time. It will not work because they don't control this. Albertans do. Albertans control what their future is going to be now. And just to pause for a minute, I haven't said this and I should. Our base starting point is highly unusual. I started researching to find another democracy where the courts, their highest court, and their federal government had put in a process for a region, a state, or a province to leave, to declare independence. And there isn't one in the Commonwealth, right? So the fact that that Canada has had the Supreme Court of Canada rule and lay out a process for a province to separate and declare independence, and the federal government has codified that decision and given it additional detail through the Federal Clarity Act, is rare. It's very, very rare. Well, why is it that BC can't do this right now, or perhaps Manitoba? Well, you don't have the same, and I don't know the details of their laws, but I know Alberta's gone further than any other province, is we now have in Alberta and have had, it was initially brought in under Kenny and now improved, which we've talked about by Premier Smith. She announced it a week ago, the day after the federal election, which is for citizens to get together in sufficient number to compel the provincial government to actually hold a referendum.
It almost seemed like she was rooting for that without rooting for it. I mean, her wording was genius, I thought.
Well, and just let me finish the illuminating the picture and the path. Yes. And so then we have the province, and we've had this on the books for a decade or more, perhaps longer. We've had our referendum legislation that said at any time our provincial cabinet can announce it's holding a referendum. That's what Kenny did with the equalization. So we have all of the mechanisms in place now, and we have the political will from the grassroots and the resources and the capability, despite the fact there's 13 groups. As I said, back from my experience in Ottawa, they're all going in the same direction because they know deep inside why they're doing it. So this is very, very real. This is very unusual. It's not normal for a nation state, a democracy, particularly Commonwealth country, to have a mechanism for a province or a region or a state to legally leave. We have that. And we have the political conditions in Canada alone, I think, to make it a real thing. I realize it's a difficult challenge, and there's a lot of votes that will have to be obtained on referendum day. And then we have the wild card of a suitor by the name of Donald J. Trump, who really wants us, and I think wants Saskatchewan too. So this is going to be a fascinating time in history, in Canadian history for sure, as to what unfolds. When you look at Trump's term, you look at Danielle Smith's term, you pick those as ed dates, 29, 27, and then 2026 for the referendum. It's all a viable timeline. My biggest fear was that the referendum would be too soon, that we wouldn't have an opportunity to delve into the issues and help people understand how to approach them, like this treaty issue. And that was answered today by the Premier's speech.
So what happens if Mark Carney makes a deal and he capitulates to all of Danielle Smith's demands? And she's got a lot of them. She outlined some of them today in her address to Albertans, but there was a long list just last week or the week before. And
I have them here. Can I read I have the bullet short form. Can I read them off?
Absolutely.
Okay. So pursuing a new Alberta Accord within Canada, demanding guaranteed port access for Alberta energy and resources. So that means getting rid of the the tanker ban on the West Coast. A repeal of the harmful federal laws like C-69 and the emissions cap. So there's two things there. The emissions cap is under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And it's essentially, if you read it, and I've studied it, it's a production cap. It's just like, they use the word emissions, but they also use the word production even more. And you game it out. You go, this is a production cap. They want oil stuck in the ground. And then 69 is not just doesn't stop pipelines. That's what it's called for ease of reference. It's the Canadian Environmental Impact Assessment Act. And it applies to every major project. It applies to expanding a port facility. It applies to a coal mine. It applies to a forestry project. It's a socialist dream. You can't get through it. One of the things you have to do under this act, if you're a proponent, if you're a mining company, a forestry company, a pipeline company, whatever, you have to demonstrate the impact of your proposed project, quote, on the intersection of sex, gender, and other identifiable oppressive characteristics. No one can agree on what the word intersection means there. We know it's not a thing with traffic lights. And so all the opponents have to say is you haven't done it. And then, so all the companies have said, well, we're either going to build a new mine in northern Manitoba, or we're going to build a new mine in Brazil. It's decision day for this international mining company. And they go, well, sorry, Canada, we're not coming to you with our $3 billion investment. We're going to Brazil because we can't figure out what this means. And that's what we've seen. We've seen capital flight and the loss of projects in, it's just stunning, the number. So that's what C-69 is about. It's not just pipelines. It's any significant industrial economic activity requires a federal environmental impact assessment, and it requires you to be measured against a standard that no one can define and anybody can say you failed to meet. Next one she has on the list here, requiring Albertans' consent for any export restrictions on our resources. So if Carney's thinking he's going to retaliate against Trump, because remember he said in the election campaign, and I was stunned at the stupidity of his words, and he said it again in his acceptance speech, and I was double stunned. He said, our relationship with the United States is over. What? Yeah. Our closest neighbor physically, in other words, low transportation costs and shipping costs, the largest economy and market in the world? Hello? Like, are you stoned? What the heck? So one of the tools that he'll want to use, the most valuable things the Americans need every day, is our oil and gas that we ship across the line. So Carney may be thinking that he's going to impose a tariff on that. So the premier's saying, you got to confirm that before you would do anything like that, an export tax, you will get our consent, a prior informed consent. I'm using
Which
the
will
wrong
never
mouse.
be given. Never.
So hang on, I got to flip screens here. Here we go. Here's the next list. Granting Alberta the same federal transfers as BC, Ontario, and Quebec. In other words, what she was saying today, what I heard her say, was we have no problem sending $4 billion a year to help out Nova Scotia. But the idea that you're going to exclude all of the revenue that Quebec gets from hydro sales, primarily to the United States, from the calculation of Quebec's revenue, and as a result, we're going to send them $13 billion, ain't happening. Same province that says, we're never going to let you put a pipeline through, and refuses to drill and produce their own natural gas. So what she's saying there is, you got to revisit equalization. This idea of Alberta being sugar daddy for the provinces that can carry their own and don't need our support ain't happening. But we will continue to support and send money to those that truly need it. The next one is launching the Alberta Next panel to explore long-term options for economic and constitutional protections. So she's going to do some traveling roadshow there. Preparing for a 2026 referendum on key proposals that emerge from the discussions. She talks about defending Indigenous rights and treaties without compromise. We've already discussed that. The treaties are not under threat. There's nothing to defend. Everybody who understands what's going on is saying, no, we'll honor the treaties, but First Nations should have choices. And she's also talked in her speech about the federal government dropping the requirement for net zero electricity production. The transition to do that in Alberta will be hundreds of billions of dollars. Even if we had that laying around, that money, it doesn't matter because there's not enough transformers and conductors and components for electrical substation that could be produced around the world to meet that target. It's an absolutely fantastical fantasy target.
And
It's
what kind
delusional.
of energy would it be? Would it be solar? Would it be wind?
Well,
Because
it'd be
you couldn't do
solar and
hydro.
wind, and they want us to get off our natural gas. So we phased out our coal really probably too quickly, in my view. And we switched our coal plants to natural gas plants. But you know, I follow this person, and it's real-time energy thing on Twitter. So every hour you get this report, and it'll say when it's really cold or really hot, it'll go like 98% or 90% of our electricity is being produced by something other than wind or solar. Because when it's really cold, the windmills can't function. They'll break. The hydraulics are frozen. And the solar panels are covered in snow. And usually for that kind of temperature means the sun's not out. And besides, at that time of the year, you know, we're dark most of the time. We just get sun from 9:30 till 3 in the afternoon, kind of.
Yep.
And then in the summer, when it's really hot and everybody's air conditionings are going, or air conditioning units are on, solar panels, their efficiency drops radically as the temperature goes up. And the wind, when it's really hot, it tends not to be windy. So my slogan is renewables fail when you need them most. Renewables fail when you need them most. And it's not acceptable to say to Albertans, look, we realize that the renewables aren't going to work for the next 4 days. We're going to be in a cold snap. It's going to be from -38 to -45. By end of day 4, we're all dead, or most people are dead. And that's not an exaggeration, right? Like, what are you going to do if you don't have a wood burning stove? Everything's going to freeze. So this is just irresponsibility in the extreme. So that was another thing. And then get rid of this mandate that they imposed that all the vehicles have to be electric vehicles by a certain date.
2035.
And the final one that I can recall is the legislation they brought in through the amendments to the Competition Act that say that if you misrepresent your anticipated environmental performance, an environmental group can come after you, and the penalty is a percentage of your global profits from the previous year. So you're a mining company, and 20% of your business is in Canada. You have a decision to expand you've got enough money to build 2 more mines, and you got 4 countries to build them in, and you layer all these things up. That's why there's no investment happening in Canada, and it's going to take a long time to turn it around.
You know, Mark Carney has lived for these objectives over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. He was the UN special climate change envoy. His book is Values. It's all about net zero. It's all about ESG, forcing large companies into situations where if they don't comply with all of these regulations that you have just talked about, they will be climate roadkill, quote unquote. That is what Mark Carney said. So there is absolutely no chance of capitulation. I believe that Danielle Smith knows that. And I truly get the sense that even though she says, and I guess she's saying this simply for media purposes, and she doesn't want to scare 70% of the province at this stage, I believe she is all for independence and would be a great person to lead that charge moving forward. But she's setting the stage in such a way that she knows that Carney's never going to play ball with what she's saying. She knows that.
Well, I haven't asked her the question personally, but I have observed her speak. And I think if she could choose an outcome, she would choose one where Canada remains united, Alberta remains part of Canada, but we have fundamental structure reform so that when the polls close in Ontario, Albertans aren't wasting their time going to the polling station, because that's the reality. 416 and 613 or whatever the area codes are decides the election. So that would be one thing, and that would require a renegotiation of confederation in terms of our structures and our institutions, and maybe having a real Senate as opposed to a patronage pit, which it's objectively all it is, right?
Yeah.
By any honest assessment.
You know what I got a kick out of when you go to talk about the Senate, there's this group called the Independent Senators Group. How on earth can you be independent and be in a group? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, just research how many bills the Senate has turned down.
Yeah.
And you'll find that it's like 3 half bills. They didn't really turn them down. They just caused a delay in them.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
a minor amendment. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was never intended that way. When our country was formed, the Senate was to be the equalizer, recognizing that the House of Commons would be driven by population and the Senate would be represented by region to create a balance, right? And that balance doesn't exist because our Senate's never functioned other than a patronage pit and a rubber stamp. So my assessment of where she's at is she's going to do everything she can to try and keep Canada together, but get a better deal for Alberta, get the economic knee off our neck by these ideological extremists, hopefully get them to stop being reckless with our credit card and buying things we don't want and making us pay for them. But she's also believes fundamentally in democracy, and I know that for certain. And so if it's the case that the majority of Albertans decide that they do want to leave Canada, she's indicated she will respect that. So, but I don't think this is a gimmick to try to achieve independence. I think her personal view is she'd like to see Canada stay together, but she also doesn't see it as her job to be the person who determines that. It should be the people.
Last thing, because I've had you almost 2 hours here and it was only supposed to be 90 minutes. And I'm thinking that you're going to be the guy who brings all of the differing groups together in one room, and you're going to work it out and come up with one objective. And I wish you all the best with that. And you don't have to answer this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Where do you come down on all of this? What's your position?
My position is that when you look at the size of most countries around the world, when you look at the nature of cultures in countries that are successful, I really do believe Canada might be too big to be a viable country, and that it might make a lot more sense for us to have a number of smaller countries. And I do believe if I only had one choice, I would pick Alberta Independence without a doubt, having studied it. I've got a political science degree where I studied Alberta politics in particular, Canadian history in particular as to how our country formed. And of course, I've been a litigator and I've been on the front end of some historic moments. Unfortunately, I've come to the conclusion that the best thing, and I think even it's the best for the other parts of the country, because they got to clean up their act. They got to get off the couch and stop relying on these checks from Alberta. And they've got to diversify their economies too, and stop being so reliant on government, because that just costs money.
Okay, you know what? I one more thing. I'm sorry, but you're a constitutional guy and you would probably have the answer to this. Saskatchewan, we've talked about as well. And again, you guys, I'm going to have Nadine Ness from Unified Grassroots on Thursday night. She's going to talk about the petition that she started in Saskatchewan. But there are other regions of the country who think, you know, this is a really good idea. Do I have to move all the way to Alberta or Saskatchewan, or can I just stay where I am? For example, border municipalities in British Columbia and Manitoba. I mean, when you look at Manitoba, you see one large city and then the rest. And the population is 1.5 million in Manitoba, 1 million of which is in the Winnipeg capital region. The rest of the people, they don't want to be Manitobans, especially the ones who live along the Saskatchewan border. Is there any way that a municipality can vote for independence from the province that they're in? Have you ever heard of anything like that before?
Not under our current laws and our current constitution. The way it's set up is that it's determined by a province. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled that a province can hold a province-wide referendum by the voters of the province. So no, I mean, anything's possible in terms of what could be in the future, but as under our current legal rules, it's only a province that could vote to become independent.
Not a municipality. Thank you, Keith, for spending all of this time with us tonight, giving us this valuable insight and into the possibilities of what may yet come. And let's stay in touch, because I want to keep on top of this for the next while. I want to see what happens out there. And you know, judging from the amount of people at the crowd at the rally in Edmonton this week, it looks like a good start.
Agreed. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We'll talk to you again. Keith Wilson, everybody. Thanks, Keith, for coming on tonight. We're going to come back with the extension in exactly 30 seconds.